know that most of what you've seen, read, or heard about Billy the Kid is untrue? My name is Gail Cooper. I'm a medical doctor and forensic psychiatrist. My specialty is murder case consultation for the defense. For 20 years, I've used my expertise to uncover the real Billy the Kid. Researching over 40,000 pages of archival documents and books, I've written the revisionist history. It's shocking, it's liberating, and I've written books demolishing the hoaxes, hijacking the history. My talks will share with you what I've found. Cover-ups, misinformation, and fakery, to use Old West lingo, will bite the dust. This talk presents my revisionist history of Lew Wallace's outlaw myth of Billy the Kid. The information is from my book, The Lost Pardon of Billy the Kid, an analysis factoring in the Santa Fe Ring, Governor Lew Wallace's dilemma, and a territory in rebellion. One can say that so-called history of Billy the Kid is partly the outlaw myth creation of a guilty conscience in a creative writer. Best-selling novelist and New Mexico Territory Governor Lew Wallace's betrayal of his 1879 pardon bargain with Billy Bonney yielded 20 years of his publishing fables, covering up his guilt by making himself the hero and Billy the villain. Talks 21 to 29 analyzed Lew Wallace's pardon betrayal. In Lew Wallace's Billy the Kid outlaw myth, Billy was a murderous outlaw obsessed with killing him, and he futilely offered a pardon to reform the incorrigible desperado. Wallace's lies hid that Billy fulfilled the pardon bargain's sole condition of testifying in the grand jury to indict Houston Chapman's murderers. Wallace even hid that their pardon bargain meeting was in Lincoln, switching it to Santa Fe. He hid the Lincoln County War with Billy as a freedom fighter. He hid the corrupt Santa Fe Ring, which intimidated him into refusing the pardon. Lew Wallace's outlaw myth is particularly obnoxious because he knew Billy through letters and meetings, so lied maliciously. Billy's risking his life to get justice was undeniable, but Wallace merely lifted the life story Billy told him, like being born in New York City and living in Indiana, to build his fictional evil, Billy the Kid. When the Santa Fe Ring was pursuing Billy with its own outlaw myth, Billy even personally denied it to Wallace. On December 12, 1880, he wrote, "I noticed in the Las Vegas Gazette a piece which stated that Billy the Kid, the name by which I'm known in the country, was the captain of a band of outlaws who hold forth at the Portales. There is no such organization in existence, so the gentleman must have drawn very heavily on his imagination." Wallace's December 22nd response was publishing in that Las Vegas Gazette a $500 reward for Billy the Kid, the Ring's moniker for Billy. That's about equal to $13,000 today. After Wallace issued his Billy the Kid reward, he wrote to Secretary of the Interior Carl Schurz to fuse his outlaw myth to the Ring's. He wrote, "I have intelligence today from Lincoln County. The citizens are yet in the field under a very active and energetic Deputy Sheriff Pat Garrett. To stimulate them, I have made proclamation of $500 reward for the capture and delivery of the leader of the outlaws, Billy the Kid." That December 22nd, Billy was captured at Stinking Springs. From the Santa Fe jail, he wrote pardon plea letters to Wallace. The one of March 2nd, 1881 stated, "It will be to your interest to come and see me. I have some letters which date back 2 years, and there are parties who are very anxious to get them, but I shall not dispose of them until I see you." Guilty Wallace would later call it blackmail. On March 4th, 1881, Billy wrote, "I have done everything that I promised you I would, and you have done nothing that you promised me." Wallace never responded. Billy's first hanging trial in Mesilla was on March 30th. His attorney, Ira Leonard, got him off on a technicality. On April 2nd, Newman's Semi-Weekly ran an article titled "The Kid." Wallace may have provided its lies about Billy wanting to kill him. Simon Newman wrote, "The Kid is a notoriously dangerous character who has made his brags that he only wants to get free in order to kill 3 men, one of them being Governor Wallace." On April 13th, 1881, in the William Brady killing trial, Billy was sentenced to hang on May 13th. No pardon came. On April 28th, Billy escaped from Lincoln's courthouse jail. That same April 28th, unaware of Billy's jailbreak, the Las Vegas Gazette's owner, J.H. Kugler, printed "Interview with Governor Wallace on the Kid." The conversation drifted into the sentence of the Kid, "It looks as though he would hang, Governor. He appears to look to you to save his neck." "Yes," said Governor Wallace, smiling, "but I can't see how a fellow like him should expect any clemency from me." Wallace wanted Billy dead to hide the truth. On April 30th, he wrote Billy's death warrant for Pat Garrett. Then Wallace learned about Billy's jailbreak. On May 3rd, he placed a second reward notice, this time in the Santa Fe Daily New Mexican. It stated, "Billy the Kid, $500 reward. I will pay $500 reward to any person or persons who will capture William Bonney, alias the Kid, and deliver him to any sheriff of New Mexico." On May 16th, Wallace published his first Outlaw Myth article in the St. Louis Daily Globe Democrat, even though leaving his governorship in 12 days. It was titled, "The Thugs' Territory. Stage robbers and cutthroats have things their own way in New Mexico. General Lew Wallace anxious to punish crime that is so prevalent." A chapter about Billy the Kid. Wallace lied that Billy lost the pardon by continued outlawry. He made up a monster Billy the Kid as a serial murderer of 40 victims, a rapist, a highwayman, and a rustler. The excerpted article stated, "Your correspondent visited Santa Fe, and the governor gave a very interesting sketch of the life of Billy the Kid, the most noted and desperate character in New Mexico. Governor Wallace has offered a reward of $500 for his recapture. I deem him," said the governor, "the most dangerous man at large, and I hope I will have the pleasure of seeing him meet his just deserts for the many crimes he has committed." Billy, he said, was born in the East and for some years lived in Indianapolis, Indiana. He is 21 years of age and came to New Mexico with his head crammed with dime novel stories. His ambition was to become one of the most noted outlaws he had read so much of. He settled down in Lincoln, making his name in the terror of the inhabitants. He stole, murdered, ravished women, and at one time stole a herd of cattle consisting of 300 head. It is claimed he has killed some 40 men, and it is positively known that he killed at least 5 or 6 in Mexico alone. Some 2 years ago, a murder was committed in New Mexico, and Governor Wallace was positive that Billy had a hand in the deed. He learned that he was in the mountains a short distance from Santa Fe and sent a messenger with a note saying that if he was willing to give his evidence before the grand jury, he would grant him a pardon, providing he also led a different life. Billy was to meet him at a certain house in Santa Fe. At the appointed time, a knock was heard at the door, and in walked Billy the Kid. A long talk followed, and it was agreed that the sheriff should arrest him to protect him from the pals of the murderer. The governor's idea in granting a pardon to Billy was to capture the leader and break up the gang. Billy was brought before the grand jury, testified, and 2 of the men were sentenced to be hanged. Since the day Billy received the governor's letter, he has been leading the life of a murderer, stage robber, etc., and felt that the letter would forever shield him from the law. At length, Billy committed 1 murder too many, was arrested, and sentenced to be hanged on the 13th instant at Santa Fe, but escaped by killing 2 of the guards. While in jail, he wrote 2 letters to the governor demanding a pardon and threatening to expose him should he not do as requested. The governor remembered the letter and sent word to Billy's lawyer that he might do him a favor by publishing it. This was too much for the outlaw, and he openly avowed that Lew Wallace would die by his hands. But the governor does not fear him, and as soon as the outlaw is within 2 days' ride of Santa Fe, Wallace himself will start the pursuit. This claptrap was recycled and embellished as Wallace's lying formula for the next 20 years. He was as much writing the hero myth of Lew Wallace as the outlaw myth of Billy the Kid. On June 15, 1881, Russ Kistler's Las Vegas Daily Optic published an odd outlaw myth article titled "The Land of the Petulant Pistol, Scenes Where Life and Land Are Cheap, Billy the Kid as a Killer." It's odd because Lew Wallace may have authored it. Its byline cited a Jap Turpin of the Indianapolis Saturday Review. Wallace was then back home in Indiana, and 3 days later, on June 18th, he published in the Crawfordsville Saturday Evening Journal his own outlaw myth article, also with "The Land of the Petulant Pistol" in its title. Kistler's excerpted article stated, "A young man by the name of Lute Wilcox, city editor of the Daily Optic, came by. I said, 'Tell me something of Billy the Kid.' Of all the killers in that country, the Kid is the most successful. He has slain 36 and wants to wind up with Governor Wallace. The governor has offered a reward of $500 for his apprehension. He had been in New Mexico about 4 years. At first, he was only a herder and got his hands in by killing Mexicans. His last triumphant escape was about 3 months ago. 2 officers were on duty, one a deputy United States Marshal by the name of Bell in the room with him. A pistol shot was heard. 'The Kid has tried to escape,' said one of the officers, who at the time was upon the street, 'and Bell has shot him.' The room was in the 2nd story of the building. Saying this, he opened the door and walked in. Billy the Kid stood at the head of the stairs and shot him down. He had worked his bracelet off and snatched the officer's pistol. Billy then shuffled to a blacksmith shop. The smith cut his irons, and he compelled another man to saddle him a fleet horse. He is now in the San Juan country collecting a large party of killers. An officer, at the insistence of Governor Wallace, started in search of him." On June 18th was Wallace's admitted article. Back in Crawfordsville only 11 days, he had just gotten his desired ambassadorship to Turkey. The Crawfordsville Saturday Evening Journal had Billy the Kid, General Wallace tells why the young desperado of New Mexico wanted to kill him, a dashing and daring career in the land of the petulant pistol. This version adds Houston Chapman with Jesse James as one of his murderers. It lies that Billy's pardon bargain was to indict Chapman's killers, then to testify in their trials. But Billy broke it by leaving before the trials. This Billy escapes a burning house as an outlaw exploit. Lifted from real Billy's December 12, 1881 letter to Wallace is Cattle King John Chisholm, fictionalized as Billy's employer, against whom Vicious Billy had a murder vendetta for unpaid wages. Excerpted, it stated, accounts of the exploits of Billy the Kid, the New Mexico outlaw, have made him the chief among frontier desperados. In Crawfordsville, additional interest in him is created by the fact that he is the same who swore to kill General Wallace, late governor of New Mexico. His real name is William Bonney, and he was born in New York, which place he left when a small boy with his widowed mother for Indiana, and 4 years ago went to the territory of New Mexico. He now lives in the mountains to evade the edicts of the law, being under sentence for death for murder. He has killed 39 men and is still not satisfied. He worked for John Chisholm, the cattle dealer, in the late Lincoln County trouble, and claiming he has never received the promised $5 per day for his services, he is killing Chisholm's herdsmen and giving their employer credit for $5 for each man killed. It is only recently that he killed 2 guards of the Lincoln County Jail. It was during this confinement that he swore to kill Governor Wallace. Given in the following narrative, which a reporter of the Journal got from General Wallace, is the cause of Billy's anger at the governor. A young lawyer named Chapman was murdered in Lincoln County, and for this were arrested 4 men, among whom was the notorious Jesse James. Governor Wallace heard that the kid saw the murder and sent him a note requesting a conference with him at midnight at a certain house. The note assured the kid that if he would testify before the grand jury, the governor would pardon him for crimes for which he had been indicted, provided he would leave the territory for good. Promptly at midnight, Billy the Kid walked in. Governor Wallace asked Billy to tell what he knew. The governor asked him if he would go before the grand jury and tell the same thing. Billy's reply was that he would not dare to do it voluntarily, as the criminal's friends would kill him. The governor suggested permitting himself to be captured. This was agreed upon. He went before the grand jury, and by his evidence the criminals were indicted for murder. But before the trial in which he was to appear as a witness for the prosecution, he tired of jail life and took to the mountains. Billy was informed that he had not complied with all the conditions of the promise. This greatly enraged the young outlaw. While under sentence of death, he swore to kill 3 men, Governor Wallace, John Chisholm, and Pat Garrett. He gained liberty by killing his 2 guards. Governor Wallace felt no particular alarm and was more anxious to find Billy than Billy was to find him. There was once a 3-day siege of a house in which were Billy and a party. When Billy was a prisoner, General Wallace had him to tell of the workings on the inside. The besieging party finally succeeded in firing the house, and those inside were driven to the kitchen. One by one, those attacked ran out the door. Each fell until the kid escaped without a scratch. Lew Wallace actually had 2 obsessions about the pardon bargain. One was hiding his betrayal. The other was repairing his self-esteem as its betrayer. The latter yielded December 10, 1893's San Francisco Chronicle's article titled Lew Wallace's Foe, Threatened by Billy the Kid, the Writing of Ben-Hur Interrupted, an Incident of the Soldier Author's Career in New Mexico. By then, Wallace was also competing with Billy's rising fame, calling him the illustrious Billy the Kid. The pardon was omitted. There is just Hero Wallace capturing outlaw Billy the Kid, Billy's jailbreak, and Billy's obsession with killing Wallace. The excerpted article stated, General Wallace was once governor of the territory of New Mexico. His enemy was the illustrious Billy the Kid. No man had ever excited more terror on the frontier. He boasted that he had killed more men than he was years of age and would shoot a man just to see him kick. Note that Wallace lifted that phrase from Billy's March 23, 1879 interview with him about a murderer named Marion Turner. Governor Wallace offered a reward for his capture. The result was that Billy the Kid was surrounded by an overwhelming numbers and forced to surrender. Enraged at having been trapped, the outlaw swore that he would kill 3 men. One was a judge who had passed sentence upon him. One was Pat Garrett, and the third was Governor Lew Wallace. This seemed like idle boasting. He was in the custody of Sheriff Garrett in the county jail of Lincoln. Garrett appointed as guards Bob Ollinger and John, it was James, Bell. One day, when Ollinger had gone across the street to a restaurant, Bell took the kid from his cell to an upstairs room in the little 2-story adobe jail. He unfastened his cuff for him to eat. The kid dealt him a rap on the head with the handcuffs and snatched the revolver from the holster and sent a bullet through Bell's body. Ollinger heard the shot. The outlaw seized a double-barreled shotgun and ran out on the front balcony. Before Ollinger's foot struck the steps, he fell with a load of buckshot in his heart. Billy the Kid then rode out of town saying, "Now for the governor." It soon became known that Governor Wallace was improving himself as a pistol shot preparatory to an impromptu duel with Billy the Kid. Pat Garrett was in hot pursuit of Billy the Kid. The announcement finally came from Fort Sumner that Garrett had forever rid the country of the Kid. He entracked him to the house of Peter Maxwell near Fort Sumner, and concealing himself in one of the rooms, he had fired one shot. It passed through the desperado's heart, and he fell dead in his tracks. On January 6, 1894, Wallace gave a Billy the Kid interview to the weekly Crawfordsville Review as Street Pickings. Omitting the pardon bargain, he fabricated himself as the object of Billy's vengeance and as an expert marksman. The excerpted article stated, General Wallace is a dead shot with a pistol. Speaking of how and why he acquired such expert marksmanship, the renowned author-soldier said, When I was governor of New Mexico, that territory was terrorized by bands of daring and murderous outlaws, at the head of whom was the famous border desperado, Billy the Kid. By virtue of my office, I became this man's deadliest enemy. He had openly boasted that he killed nearly 50 men and enjoyed shooting a man down just to see him kick. I determined to rid the territory of this scourge and offered a large reward for his capture. After a most exciting chase, the outlaw was surrounded by overwhelming numbers and compelled to surrender at the point of 50 guns after shooting down 3 of his pursuers. He was taken to Lincoln County to answer an unusually flagrant murder. He was wildly enraged at having been trapped and swore that the moment he got free, he would shoot me down. I determined, in order to be safer, to begin pistol practice. One day at Santa Fe, we got the alarming news that Billy the Kid had murdered his 2 jailers, stolen a horse, and had started for Santa Fe with the open threat, now for the governor. Finally, one day, there rode up to my residence a travel-stained 6-footer. I met him on the front step. "I am Pat Garrett, Governor. I've just shot Billy the Kid out here at Fort Sumner. He had come up with a desperado heading for Santa Fe to end me, and shot him through the heart." A new century didn't dampen Lew Wallace's obsession with defaming Billy and promoting himself. On June 23, 1900, for the Indianapolis Press, he embellished his outlaw myth in General Wallace's feud with Billy the Kid, when the general was governor of New Mexico and Billy Bonney was the most dangerous Western outlaw. He was a waif and was reared in Indiana. For it, Wallace made up the tally of killing a man for each of his 22 years, later changed to 21. He also apparently used Pat Garrett's 1882 book, The Authentic Life of Billy the Kid, for his own fiction of Billy's death, and he repeated his lie that the pardon bargain required testifying in the trials after indicting Chapman's murderers. The excerpted article stated, "Yes, he killed a man for every one of the 22 years he lived," General Wallace said. "I will never lose the image of Billy the Kid as I saw him that midnight in old Santa Fe back in 1879. The door flew open, and there stood the most feared man in New Mexico, hunted by every limb of the law. The room was covered by a Winchester rifle held in one hand, in the other was a Colt revolver. Your note gave me the promise of protection," he said. "There is no one here but us 3, replied I, pointing to the owner of the cottage. Billy came straight to the table near which I sat. The general said, "Billy the Kid, the New Mexican outlaw that attracted the attention of a nation and under whose fearful vendetta I was placed while governor of New Mexico, was a New York waif whose name was William Bonney. He was brought to Indiana when he was a small boy. He was about 17 years old in 1876 when he went west. Billy the Kid became the most daring and notorious of desperados. He started by taking employment of John Chisholm, the cattle king, who disputed Billy's account. The latter swore that he would square matters by killing Chisholm's herdsmen, that for each man he killed, he would credit the cattleman with $5, but if he killed Chisholm himself, then the whole account would be wiped out. A young lawyer named Chapman was murdered at Lincoln. 4 men were arrested, among them the notorious Jesse James. I had been sent to pacify the country. I heard that Billy the Kid had witnessed the murder. In the outskirts of Santa Fe lived an old squire who was one of Billy's friends. Note that Wallace lifted Justice of the Peace John Wilson's nickname of Squire, in whose Lincoln house he and Billy had actually met. I told him I wanted the young outlaw to meet me promptly at midnight. In a note, I said if he would appear before the grand jury and court and convict them, I would pardon him for all his crimes. The midnight meeting was as I have described. When he heard from my lips my proposition, he said, "My God, Governor, they would kill me." "But that can be arranged," I replied. It was decided that Billy was to be taken the next morning. It was during this confinement that the Kid gave the most phenomenal exhibition of shooting. Wallace then made up that Billy told him the trick to aiming was laying his index finger along the barrel and pretending to point at the target. It was a week before the trial. He said to his guards, "Tell the governor that I'm tired." Unhitching a horse, he dashed out of town. Later, Billy was arrested for a series of murders. He'd kept my note offering pardon. He had been in jail a week when he addressed me. "Governor, why haven't you come to see me?" A few days later, there was a second note. "Governor, I have some papers you would not want to see displayed. Come to the jail." I knew what he meant. I sent a copy over to the paper, and it was published. It was then that he swore his vendetta on my life. He was convicted for murder and sentenced to be hanged. He had gone through many a danger. At one time, surrounded in a Mexican house, the kid fought 9 men. The house was set on fire, and he escaped through all the musketry. From his trial, continued Governor Wallace, Billy was taken back to jail. A day before the execution, 9 guards were watching him. At dinner time, all but one left. As the guards stood to place the dinner tray on the floor, Billy the Kid struck him with the handcuffs, crushing the skull. Then he took the guard's revolver, routed all the other guards, forced a blacksmith to break the handcuffs, mounted a good horse, and rode away. It is needless to touch upon my danger under the vendetta. Sufficient it is to say that he started for Santa Fe at once, and determined to have a shot in return, I started out to meet him, but for some reason he never reached the point. Sheriff Pat Garrett was the only man in New Mexico not afraid of Billy. Pat received information that Billy had gone back to an old fort in the mountains to see his sweetheart. Garrett journeyed there. He lay in wait in the dooryard of Billy's love, and finally saw the door open one night and a man came out in stocking feet. Garrett walked in and covered the girl's father with a gun. Not a word, he whispered as he passed behind the headboard of the bed with gun in hand. The door opened again. Billy seemed to smell danger. He cried to the old man in Spanish, "Who's there?" Garrett raised his revolver. There were 2 reports. There were 2 bullet holes through his heart. He was only 22. On June 8, 1902, Wallace published his last Billy the Kid Outlaw Myth article, his lying silenced in about 2.5 years by his cancer death. Novella-like, it was in New York World magazine, almost 21 years after Billy died because of his betrayed pardon. It was titled, General Lew Wallace Writes a Romance of Billy the Kid, Most Famous Bandit of the Plains, Thrilling Story of the Midnight Meeting between General Wallace, then Governor of New Mexico, and the notorious outlaw in a lonesome hut in Santa Fe. The text came from Wallace's manuscript for his autobiography, which he was then writing. The excerpted article stated, General Lew Wallace, author of Ben-Hur, is completing his autobiography. The most thrilling chapter tells of the midnight meeting between General Wallace, at the time governor of the territory of New Mexico, and Billy the Kid, the most notorious outlaw in the far west has ever produced. General Wallace conceived the idea that he might gain certain important information by a face-to-face talk. On the night of the meeting, Wallace and the owner sat in the hut, which was on the outskirts of Santa Fe. The door flew open, and standing was Billy the Kid. In his left hand, he carried a Winchester rifle. In his right was a revolver. He had killed scores of men, and he was the quarry of every sheriff. General Wallace was able to effect an important arrangement with the outlaw, of which he gives the details. Shortly before I had become governor of New Mexico, Chapman, a young attorney in Lincoln, had been murdered. Note that Wallace is self-protectively lying because Chapman was murdered over 4.5 months after his arrival as governor. He was accused of ignoring the troubles. When I reached New Mexico, it was declared that Billy the Kid had been a witness. I'd been sent to pacify the territory. Therefore, I arranged the meeting. Testify, I said, before the grand jury in the trial court and convict the murderer of Chapman, and I will let you go scot-free with a pardon in your pocket for all your misdeeds. Governor, said he, if I were to do what you ask, they would kill me. We can prevent that, said I. To all appearances, his capture was to be genuine. To this he agreed. He was confined to the Lincoln County Jail. It was here that Governor Wallace, in spite of the fears of the guards, permitted the outlaw to give an exhibition of his skill with the revolver and the rifle. Billy did not remain long confined. One morning he told his guards, "Boys, tell the governor I'm tired," and he rode off. He was arrested soon afterward for a series of murders and was brought again to the Lincoln County Jail. Patrick Garrett was sheriff. Billy must have considered himself in desperate straits. The outlaw sent Governor Wallace a note. It said, "Come to the jail. I have some papers you would not want to see displayed." I knew what he meant, said General Wallace. He referred to the note he received from me, in response to which he appeared in the hut on the mesa. I thwarted his purpose by giving a copy of the latter and a narrative of the circumstances connected with it to the paper published in the town. The desperado was convicted and sentenced to be hanged. 9 men were put on guard. On the day before that set for his execution, one man sat in front of Billy while he ate his dinner. Billy dashed his brains out with his handcuffs. He seized the dead guard's revolver and routed all the other guards. He forced a blacksmith to break the manacle chains, seized a good horse, and rode away. Patrick Garrett received information that Billy had gone back to an old fort in the mountains to see his sweetheart. Garrett lay in wait in the dooryard of the home of Billy's love, and finally he saw the door open one night and a man step out. Garrett covered the girl's father with his gun. "Not a word," he said, and stood behind the headboard of the bed. The door opened again, and Billy the Kid entered. Instinct taught him that something was wrong. He cried to the cowering old man in Spanish, "Who's here?" Garrett raised his revolver. 2 shots rang out. A form tottered, then crashed to the floor. In the nerveless hand was a smoking revolver. The notorious New Mexican outlaw had missed his aim, but there were 2 bullet wounds in the body of Billy the Kid, and both pierced the heart. Las Cruces, actually Fort Sumner, possesses the final resting place of the worst bad man that ever infested the southwestern border. An ancient Mexican who sometimes shows his grave to visitors responded when asked, "How old was Billy when he died?" 21, senor, replied the ancient. "How many, amigo, had this man killed?" "He had killed 21 men, 1 for each year of his age," said the Mexican. Note that Wallace's fake tally is inscribed on one of Billy's Fort Sumner gravestones. General Wallace also tells in his autobiography how and why Billy the Kid started on his career of crime. The man whose deeds of blood had drawn upon him the eyes of an entire nation was born a New York waif. Before he was more than 10 years of age, he was brought to Indiana. In 1876, when he was about 17 years old, he suddenly left his home to the country of the men of his kind, the frontier of the far west. Billy began his career with an oath to kill John Chisholm, his first employer. Chisholm and the Kid had been unable to agree on terms of settlement for a season's work. The result was that the lad's fearful vendetta sworn not only against Chisholm, but against all of Chisholm's other employees as well. Then his bloody career began. It was not long until William Bonney became the most feared man in the Southwest. Lew Wallace also created an enduring secondary myth that Billy was short. Wallace's December 10, 1893, San Francisco Chronicle article titled Lew Wallace's Foe stated, Garrett appointed as guards over the kid Bob Ollinger and John, it was James, Bell, who towered over their diminutive prisoner. In fact, Billy, at 5 feet 8 or 9, was almost the same height as Wallace at 5 feet 10, both above their day's average of 5 feet 6. The December 27, 1880, Las Vegas Daily Gazette, in the Kid interview with Billy Bonney, had stated he is about 5 feet 8 or 9 inches tall, weighing about 140. Frank Coe, Billy's fellow regulator as an old-timer, wrote to a William Steele Dean on August 3, 1926, that Billy was, quote, 5 feet 8, weighed 138 pounds. Sextus Wallace also demeaned Billy as effeminate. In the Indianapolis Press's June 23, 1900's General Wallace's feud with Billy the Kid, he stated, I was not expecting to see a stripling with rounded shoulders, slightly stooping stature, effeminate physique. His voice was as musical as that of a society belle. For June 8, 1902's New York World magazine's General Lew Wallace Writes a Romance of Billy the Kid, Wallace declared that Billy left the sham jailing for lack of masculine endurance. He wrote, the desperado drawled in the feminine voice that was part and parcel of his character, tell the governor I'm tired. In fact, December 27, 1880's Las Vegas Daily Gazette's article, The Kid, interview with Billy Bonney, stated, one would scarcely mistrust that he was the hero of the 40 Thieves romance. He is quite a handsome-looking fellow. Frank Coe had written in his 1926 letter that Billy stood straight as an Indian and was a fine-looking lad. But was there more to Lew Wallace's outlaw myth? I believe he planned to use Billy in a Western novel. He'd used his Turkey ambassadorship to write his 1893 bestseller, The Prince of India, or Why Constantinople Fell. Wallace dropped clues in interviews. In January 16, 1886's Crawfordsville Saturday Evening Journal, he claimed 2 books in progress. One was The Prince of India. He added, quote, the other is wholly American. Was that a book on Billy? In a February 10, 1894 Cincinnati Post editorial, Wallace pompously declared that he surpassed Charles Dickens, who only wrote about, quote, trifling, frivolous, or bad, cheap people, while he wrote about famous people. Billy the Kid was certainly famous. On October 5, 1894, on a lecture tour of Western states, Wallace was interviewed by the St. Paul, Minnesota Dispatch. He reported a, quote, new novel in course of preparation. The same month, on the 14th, the Tacoma, Washington Daily Ledger's reporter wrote, Wallace said he is preparing to write another book. He said the subject I prefer to keep to myself. If I were to make public my subject, why, a dozen fellows might write a dozen books on the same and publish them before I had half completed mine. On April 15, 1902, the Cincinnati Commercial Tribune printed, General Lew Wallace is working on a new book. Wallace was quoted, I have been employed for the past 4 years on a book. I do not care to say what the title or character will be. It is manifestly bad policy for the financial and from every other standpoint. There's another clue. When Lew Wallace departed New Mexico Territory on May 28, 1881, he stole the official documents of his governorship, to the anger of archivists to this day. To them, he added documents of a civilian, Billy Bonney. In fact, he had enough research to write a novel on the West. and he developed its plot with 20 years of Billy the Kid Outlaw Myth articles. That has an irony. Billy Bonney's letters and interview, preserved by Wallace, reveal the real Billy the Kid, whom he'd tried so hard to hide. A later talk will discuss Billy Bonney's enemies branding him with the Outlaw Myth moniker, Billy the Kid.